Good evening. Is it on? Good evening. In over 40 years of clinical practice, Dr. Peg Dawson has worked with thousands of children and teens who struggle at home and in school. At the center of their struggles are often weak executive skills. Along with her colleague, Dr. Richard Geyer, she has written numerous books on this topic for educators, mental health professionals, and parents, among them Smart But Scattered Teens, Executive Skills in Children and Adolescents, and Coaching Students with Executive Skills Deficits. Peg is also a past president of the National Association of School Psychologists and the International School of Psychology Association, and is a recipient of NASP's Lifetime Achievement Award. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Peg Dawson.
Okay, first of all, if I stand here, can people hear me? Or would you rather? I could use the I could hold the microphone. How about people in the back? Would you be more comfortable if I use the microphone? You know what, I think I may try. Just don't want to strain my own voice. Yes, this comes out. Okay, good. I'm happy to be here. I know we have probably an equal number of people watching this remotely and soon videotaped. Let me tell you a little more about my background. I started out as a school psychologist. I worked in the public schools in Maine, New Hampshire. I worked in Exeter for a few years. I worked in Somersworth. I worked for the Stratford Learning Center, which is based in Somersworth. And then I left the public schools and started working in a clinic setting. And my interest in executive skills came about as I was transitioning out of the public schools because the place I work is now part of Seacoast Mental Health Center, but it's a center within that called the Center for Learning and Attention Disorders. Yeah, it's up there in Portsmouth. And as I was building my clinical practice, I was seeing a lot of kids referred for attention problems. And as I worked with them, I pretty quickly realized that the American Psychiatric Association's diagnostic criteria for ADHD, which is problems with attention, or problems with hyperactivity, impulsivity, or both, really didn't begin to describe the problems I saw these kids having. I saw huge problems with time management, organization, planning, those kinds of things. And I remember talking with my colleague, Dick, about it at the time. Now, he and I both did our doctoral work at the University of Virginia, but he went on to do a postdoc in neuropsychology at Children's Hospital in Boston. So as I was describing these issues, he said, okay, those are executive skills. This was the late 80s, early 90s, and people were not using that term a whole lot in those days. So Dick and I decided we really wanted to understand these skills better. What are they? How do they develop in the brain? How do they impact school performance? And most importantly, how do you help kids with weak executive skills become more successful students? So that's what led to our writing. We wrote a book for professionals first called Executive Skills in Children and Adolescents, and then we realized there was a huge role for parents in all of this. So that's what led us to write Smart But Scattered, and then Smart But Scattered Teens. We have another one. Our most recent one is for the next age level up, the 18 to 25-year-old group of kids. We sometimes call them the failure to launch kids. That one's called Smart But Scattered Installed. We've written a book for adults. It's called The Smart But Scattered Guide to Success, and we have a coaching book and an academic planning that goes along with our coaching book. At the same time I was doing all of this professionally, though, I was raising two kids of my own. I have two sons who are well into adulthood, but my older son, at the age of 14, was diagnosed with an attention disorder. And so I actually think that a lot of what I've learned about executive skills, particularly in the intervention side, that what do you do about it side, has come as much from my experience as a mom as my experience as a psychologist. And the nice thing about being the mom of one of these kids is you get the longitudinal perspective. You get to see what they look like when they grow up. And my message to parents all the time, and I do a lot of parent presentations, my message to parents all the time is most of these kids turn out fine. I can sometimes see the audience relax when I say that. If you're at the early stages of dealing with one of these kids, or the kid's not into adulthood yet, it may look pretty daunting. You don't know what the future's going to bring. But you know what, kids grow up, they mature, their brains mature. And if you use the strategies, which I will briefly describe here, but which are covered much more in our books if it sort of piques your interest. These kids really do have a good shot at success, which is why I enjoy working with them. Okay, so let me give you a quick introduction to the field. First of all, there's not a lot of consensus, as in any scientific field, starting with the name. The more common name is executive functions. So if you want to know what the research says, type executive functions into an academic search engine. My colleague Dick and I chose to call them executive skills for a very specific reason, and that was we wanted the emphasis to be on skills. You know, skill implies whatever level you're at, you can get better. Function doesn't give me that same flavor. Function sounds like a use, like a photocopy machine or a refrigerator. You know, it either works or it doesn't work. Some people combine the two and call them executive function skills. I'm happy with that because it keeps skills in the title. There's also not a lot of consensus about either the number of skills that we're talking about or what the specific skills are. In terms of number, the range I've seen is 1 to 33. One of the early researchers maintained there's really only one executive skill. We call it the central executive. At the opposite end of the extreme, a couple of researchers and creators of checklists that I know talk about 32 or 33 different executive skills. Well, to be honest, I can't wrap my head around 33 skills. Part of my message is if kids aren't acquiring these skills naturally, then as parents and teachers, we need to teach them. I can't ask anybody to teach 33 skills. So Dick and I sort of took a middle ground. We said, of all the skills that are out there that people are talking about, which ones are the most critical for school success? And could we define a pool of those skills that didn't go overboard? That sort of captured sort of the infrastructure that supports academic performance. Sometimes I call it the hidden curriculum because you absolutely need these skills for success, but no one's charged with teaching them. So we settled on 11. And more recently, I started dividing them into two groups. On the left-hand side, what you see there are what I call the foundational skills. Those are the skills that develop first. They begin to emerge, many of them in the first year of life. So they're early developing skills. The ones on the right are more advanced skills, and these are later developing skills. I should also say, I meant to say this before, what executive skills are, in general, are brain-based skills. They're managed out of the frontal lobes of the brain, which is the part of the brain right behind the forehead. And they take a minimum of 25 years to reach full maturation. So no one graduates from Pinkerton Academy with a fully functioning set of executive skills because they are still developing. So the advanced skills are more advanced. And the order in which I've listed the foundational skills is the order in which we think they emerge sort of chronologically. It's somewhat speculative. No one's developed a timeline for this, but this is our best sense from reading the research. With the advanced skills, that order is a little more arbitrary, except for metacognition, which is the last skill to emerge, at least in its more complex form. There are younger versions that look different in preschoolers, and of all the terms up there, metacognition is probably one that confuses people the most. When people ask, so what's metacognition, the throwaway line is, oh, it's thinking about thinking. But I don't even know what that means. So here's my definition of metacognition. It's the awareness that you have thoughts, and that you can use those thoughts to understand the world, solve problems, make sense out of things. It goes along with abstract thinking. It's the ability to think more deeply. And there's a good brain-based reason why it's a late developing skill. But once metacognition begins to emerge, then you often see growth in those other advanced skills. Because once you recognize you can use your thoughts as tools to solve problems, then you can use your thoughts to plan, to organize, to manage your time, etc. Now, when I am working with parents or teachers of elementary age kids, the advice I give them is focus on the foundational skills. Those are the earliest developing skills. And if you put interventions in place to address those skills at the elementary level, even with kids who are struggling, you will see progress. If you keep the intervention in place long enough, you will see progress across elementary school. When I'm talking with parents of middle school kids or teachers of middle school kids, what I tell them is, if you think kids are proficient at those advanced skills at the middle school level, you must be pretty frustrated. Because these are just emerging skills for most kids at that age. And what we know about emerging skills is they look good one day and lousy the next. So, think of riding a bike. You don't go from not being able to ride at all to being able to ride 3 miles effortlessly without falling down. No, you take a few turns of the wheel and you fall over, and you get up on the bike again, and maybe do it a little better the next time and a little worse the time after that. That's what these advanced skills are during the middle school years and even into the first couple of years of high school. And I'm talking about typically developing kids. Kids with attention disorders tend to develop or other neurodevelopmental learning disorders tend to develop these skills later. So even well into high school with many kids, these are still just emerging skills in high school. The other piece of advice I give parents and teachers of middle and high school kids is if you have a kid who's struggling with many executive skills, so they've got many executive skill challenges, focus on the foundational skills. That's the place to start. Because they're the earlier skills to develop, they end up being the building blocks for many of these later skills. So by focusing on those foundational skills, you are putting in place the pieces to enhance the later skills as well. Okay, so that's sort of a general introduction. I'm going to go through these 11 skills one by one. Again, this is our model. Different researchers use different terminology and focus on different skills. But we found these to be the most useful because we really do feel like they support academic performance. Okay. So the first executive skill to develop is response inhibition. There are a lot of different names for that. Self-control, impulse control. Sometimes we call it the ability to delay gratification. And sometimes self-regulation is a piece of response inhibition. It's basically the ability to stop and think before you say or do something. You first see the early signs of response inhibition around 6 months of age in an infant. It's pretty rudimentary at that point, because what a 6-month-old has available to it is respond, don't respond. It's going to look different in a 3-year-old, different in a 13-year-old. And as kids acquire language, they use language to support response inhibition. So if you hear a toddler say to yourself, no, don't do that, because she's heard a parent say that to her, she's using language to inhibit a response. Some people maintain, some of the experts in the field maintain that this is the most critical skill. If you don't get response inhibition, how are you going to get something like time management, planning, and things like that? At the middle high school level, new challenges emerge with response inhibition, in part because as adults, we are pulling back the supervision and monitoring of kids, as we should, because kids need to learn to navigate their world. But when you pull back, and you've got a kid with immature response inhibition, they sometimes make bad choices. The other place where we see response inhibition as being problematic with teenagers is in the whole use of technology. Smartphones, video games, they are designed to take advantage of kids with poor response inhibition, because whatever they're doing on that phone looks so enticing to them and so much more interesting than their homework or their classwork or whatever. So it can become problematic. The way we teach response inhibition, and this is most relevant with young children, although I think it's worth repeating at any age we teach, wait and stop. I mean, if you can get wait and stop in the kids, that's basically response inhibition. When I think back on my childhood, I'll just give you one example, because it does have application with older kids as well. At some point, I think I was in 8th grade, I wanted to get my ears pierced, because that's when everybody was doing it then, and my father was a pretty strict father. He didn't outright say no. He said, if you still want to get your ears pierced on your birthday, then we'll talk about it again. So this was a conversation that took place in January. My birthday is in September. I had to wait 9 months. And I was persistent, And he was flexible enough to let me get my ears pierced at that point. But I think that's a reasonable thing to do, is, to ask kids to wait. If this is really important to you, then you'll be willing to wait for it. Okay, let's go on to the next one, which is working memory. There are all different kinds of memory that people talk about. Working memory is a relatively new term, but I love it because it really is your memory working. It's not just holding on to information, but it's manipulating the information as you're retrieving it, or it's putting multiple memories together. If I want to stress this out in a testing situation, because that's what I do at the Center for Learning and Attention Disorders. I do assessments. But the easiest way to stress out working memory is give kids a multi-step math problem to solve, give it to them orally, and ask them to solve it in their head. So a question off a standard IQ test is, 8 birds are on the ground, 4 birds fly away, 2 other birds land. How many birds are on the ground now? If I ask a kid that question and he does the first step and gives me that as his answer, I'm immediately going to think, what's going on with working memory? Has he forgotten what the question is asking? Has he forgotten which step he's on? That question also requires the kid to hold on to the precise numbers in the question and to pull from long-term memory into working memory 2 math procedures, addition and subtraction. So there's a lot of memory load in that one question. There's really nothing that we ask kids to do that doesn't require working memory. I mean, even a 1-step direction, sending them to their bedroom to retrieve a sweatshirt, they still have to remember why they're there when they get there. And when I've done work in schools for kids with complex learning disabilities or dyslexia, what those teachers tell me is that working memory is the weakest skill for that population of kids. That's why they have trouble learning sight words, spelling words, math facts when they're younger. That's why they have trouble keeping track of things, particularly multi-step directions, etc. And so, there are all kinds of strategies for working memory, but the one that I really rely on is don't just use verbal instructions, because it's going to be in one ear and out the other. Give kids a visual to refer to whenever possible. Okay, onto emotional control. So this is the ability to manage emotions in order to achieve goals, complete tasks, control and direct behavior. There are 2 sides to this. One is that if kids are experiencing a lot of emotion, negative emotion, that can cut off the learning process as fast as just about anything I know. And I think we need to keep this in mind when we think about what's happened during the pandemic, because it's not over yet. We saw a stress level rising in everybody, not just adults, but also kids. And so with that stress, that ability to focus is diminished. So you have trouble paying attention, you have trouble understanding what someone is saying to you, you have trouble retaining the information being taught, because emotions are taking over. On the positive side, we know that if you can embed learning activities with tasks that are fun, or so you're eliciting positive emotions, then that makes it much easier for kids to learn. They pay attention better, they understand the material better, and they retain the information better. That's why whenever parents or teachers can figure out a fun way to teach some skill or some behavior, kids are more likely to learn it faster. Okay, there are a couple of, for kids who really struggle with emotional control, by the way, for kids who really struggle with emotional control, there are no quick fixes for this. It takes probably years of practice to get good at managing your emotions. The 2 strategies that seem to be most effective is, first of all, cognitive behavior therapy. And the way that therapy works is it starts with the assumption that your feelings are not caused by external events, but they're caused by what you tell yourself about those external events. So we ask kids to tell themselves something different. What could you say to yourself to manage that anger, that frustration, or even perfectionism? I see a lot of kids who are perfectionists. It's not that essay that's causing their anxiety. It's what they're telling themselves about that essay. what they're telling themselves about how it has to be perfect and how they have to get the top grade. And if they don't get the top grade, then horrible things are going to happen. And then the other approach, and again, this too does not happen quickly, but mindfulness meditation techniques can be very effective in teaching, helping kids learn to manage their emotions better. So those are just a couple of options if you know kids are struggling with this. Flexibility. So I mentioned that I got interested in executive skills by working with kids with attention disorders. And kids with ADD or ADHD have all kinds of executive skill problems. Flexibility is not necessarily a challenge for them. You know, very often it's a strength because these are go with the flow kinds of kids. But there are populations of kids who struggle with flexibility. Kids on the autism spectrum, for instance, there's a rigid thinking that goes along with that disorder. But I also think about flexibility as sometimes being an executive skill that lies beneath the surface, because it may not be evident. We see the behavior, we don't realize it started with inflexibility. So if you have trouble dealing with unexpected events, what happens when they occur? Your anxiety level rises. So what we see is the anxiety, but it started with inflexibility. And then I think about kids with oppositional defiant disorder. You know, when I think about those kids, I'm thinking about power struggles and control issues, and they're refusing to do what we've asked. But if you step back and say, what was the trigger? What led that kid to refuse to do what we asked? Very often it was because someone was asking that kid to be more flexible than he was capable of being. And all he had was his behavior, his way of saying, I can't do that. Now, there are ways to teach kids to become more flexible. There are curricula designed for that. There's a school-based one called Unstuck and on Target, which has, they've been developing materials for parents recently as well. A lot of that uses language to teach flexibility. So it looks like you're stuck. What can you do to get unstuck? Or, all right, that's plan A. What if plan A doesn't work? Do you have a plan B? So you're just prompting kids to be aware of things may not work the way they want them to, and it's always good to have a backup plan. Sustained attention. So this one is a critical feature of an attention disorder. There's a key phrase in my definition here, though. The definition is the capacity to maintain attention to a situation or task, and the key phrase is in spite of distractibility, fatigue, or boredom. And I've appreciated that phrase because I don't know how many kids I've seen over the years, their parents have been nudged into my office by a teacher or a pediatrician because someone thinks their kid has an attention disorder. And they'll say to me, my kid can't have ADD, he can play video games for hours. Well, video games don't involve distractibility, fatigue, or boredom. So what I tell parents is, it's not that kids with ADD can't pay attention, it's that they have trouble making themselves pay attention. That's not going to show up with video games. Where are parents going to see it? 3 places. Homework, chores, boring daily routines, like teeth brushing or taking showers. There are a lot of strategies to help increase kids' attention span. My general advice is you got to start with where the kid is at. If the kid has an attention span of 10 minutes and you ask them to do a 30-minute task, it's probably not going to go well. So can you break it into 10-minute segments? Can you give them 2-minute breaks in between those segments? Can you eventually say to a kid, how long do you think you can go before you need a break? Or how many math problems do you think you can do before you need a break? And then gradually try to stretch that out to make it a little longer or a couple more math problems. And getting up and moving, by the way, I usually forget to say this, movement is huge for kids with attention problems. Even kids who have the predominantly inattentive type of attention problems, who may not, they're not hyperactive, they do tend to be fidgety, and they too need to move. Again, I watched that with my own son. He would study for tests by pacing back and forth in his bedroom. That's the way he studied for tests. And to this day, he's like 42, works out of his home, has a standing desk. His 4th grade teacher told me after 4th grade that he didn't think my son sat down once during 4th grade. He rested one knee on the chair of the desk and worked leaning over like that, and so it's probably not surprising that to this day he uses the standing desk to work. Okay, task initiation. So this is the opposite of procrastination. And by the way, I am absolutely convinced this is the last and hardest skill to acquire. Now, I've been talking about these skills in the order in which they emerge. That says nothing about the order in which they reach full maturation. If you type procrastination into an academic search engine, you will be hit with over 5,000 citations. A lot of articles researching procrastination, which tells you people recognize it's a problem. I've read a few of those. One article gave me a developmental timeline for procrastination, and here's what it said. Now remember, procrastination is a bad thing. Procrastination increases until the mid to late 20s and decreases gradually after that. Surveys of college students have found that like 88% of college students say that procrastination is a problem for them, and 46% say it affects their grades. When I read that article, I thought, man, we got to figure out how to teach task initiation. You know, if we could do that, we could increase college graduation rates, we could decrease the amount of time kids are spending in college and save parents thousands of dollars. So I started thinking about how do you teach task initiation. And I finally came up with sort of a formula. It won't work in all cases, but I think it's a starting point. I think you teach task initiation by asking kids to make a plan with a start time. And then make sure they start the plan at the time they said they were going to start it. So if you say to your kid on Saturday morning, tell me what your plan is for cleaning up your bedroom, the kid says, I'll do it right after lunch. Well, then your job as a parent is to be there right after lunch and make sure they start cleaning their bedroom. There's a very good brain-based reason for this. The brain learns by association. So the more you can pair stated start time and actual start time over and over again, they become glued together and the first one triggers the second one. It's a variation on Pavlov's dog. It's probably one of the most famous psych experiments I've ever done. The psychologist, a Russian psychologist named Pavlov, rang a bell and he presented meat to the dog and the dog salivated. And after a while he discovered all he had to do was ring the bell and the dog salivated. Why? Because he anticipated that the meat was coming. I remember a few years ago, I was doing a workshop outside of Portland, Maine, and this mom raised her hand after I talked about that, and she said, okay, so let me tell you what I did with my kid last night, and you can tell me what I did wrong. She didn't tell me how old her kid was. I pictured middle school, early high school. She said, so last night, I said to my kid early in the evening, so, when are you going to take a shower tonight? And the kid said, I'll take it at 9 o'clock. So 9 o'clock comes and the mother says, you're going to take a shower at 9, right? And the kid says, oh, I don't even feel like taking a shower tonight. I'll take it tomorrow before school. So you know what happened, right? Mom's dragging the kid out of bed to go to school. There is no time to take a shower. So she says to me, what did I do wrong? And I had to laugh because I probably made the same mistake with my sons when they were that age. She did a lot of things right. Early in the evening, she asked the kid to come up with a time he was going to, and she left it to him. What time are you going to take a shower? That was great. She's not telling him. She's asking him, when are you going to take a shower? 9 o'clock comes, she doesn't just hammer him for not being in the shower. She says, wait, 9 o'clock, weren't you going to take a shower at 9? She did that right. It's the next step, where the kid says, oh, I really don't feel like it, I'll do it tomorrow. So what I told the mom was, at that point, what she should have said was, wait, that was your plan. You said you were going to take it at 9. I got to hold you to it, because that was your plan. And here's why I have to hold you to it, because the brain learns by association. Explain that whole brain thing. So that event A triggers event B. That is way better than saying, because I said so. I have not found a kid yet who wasn't fascinated with what's going on in the brain and how it works. So if you can explain things in terms of how the brain works, and when we get into talking about habits, that's everything. I mean, all of executive skills, to strengthen them, we're building habits. And so consistent practice is what builds those habits. Okay, so those are the first 6 foundational skills. If you have elementary age kids, you can sort of stop listening. No, that's not true. But anyway, these are the ones you should focus on. If you have kids with significant challenges, this is where to put your time and effort. The other reason for starting with the foundational skills is they lend themselves to easier interventions than the later skills. You know, it's a whole lot easier to help the kid make a plan with a start time than to help them make a plan, which is the next executive skill. Planning is way more complicated, right? There's what is it you're planning, and what materials do you need for whatever that plan is, and what are the steps involved, and what's the order of the steps, and what's important and what's not important. All that goes into planning. So obviously this is a more challenging skill. When I think of planning in a school context, I immediately think about long-term projects, because that's sort of where the rubber meets the road. And I decided several years ago that there's a mismatch between when teachers start assigning long-term projects and when kids can independently plan them. You know, when I talk with elementary teachers, they're assigning long-term projects as young as 2nd or 3rd grade. Kids don't have planning skills at that point, and teachers understand that. So what do? They break the project down into subtasks and timelines and interim deadlines, and they walk the kids through the steps. That's developmentally appropriate. Unfortunately, it also misses the opportunity to teach planning. So ideally, when teachers are assigning long-term projects, they're not doing the planning for kids, they're doing the planning with kids. They're talking with them about what are the steps involved in creating a project. Several of our books have long-term project planning templates, so there are things parents could do with kids as well. The other challenge around long-term projects is that invariably when teachers assign long-term projects, they expect kids to carry them out at home, which then puts tremendous pressure on parents to supervise those projects. So I found this picture, or actually someone sent it to me, a picture on Facebook from several years ago that really captures the problem nicely. It's a science project. And the topic of the science project is how much turmoil does the science project cause families? And it's set up the way a science project is, with materials on the left-hand side, at least one kid, at least one grudging parent, half-baked ideas of very dubious merit, and procrastination. In the center, we have the results. We have this really nice graph showing yelling and crying on one axis and time on the other axis, and the closer to the due date, the more yelling and crying is going on. We have quantitative results. 75% of kids cry, 90% of parents yell, an average of 15 hours of family time is sacrificed. Findings: everyone hates science fair. It's really sort of catches it, doesn't it? So, yeah, I mean, I could, we'll have time at the end to ask, if people want to ask questions, but I'll just leave it at that. But actually, no, I won't leave it at that, because if you want to try teaching planning, start with having a kid plan something he wants to do. You know, a fun Saturday, or let's look at everything we have to do on Saturday. We got some chores we got to do, we have some fun stuff we want to do, let's make a plan. And so you build it into their everyday lives around things that matter to them. Organization. Okay, there's a key word in my definition here. The ability to create and maintain systems to keep track of information or materials. Lately I've been asking people what's the key word, and they're always getting it right now. They didn't used to. The key word is maintain, right? People used to say, when I say, so what's the key word? They might say ability, they might say systems, they might say create. This is my weakest skill. I am not good at organization. And so when they say, come up with those words, I tell them, now I am great at creating systems of organization. Every 4 weeks I have to come up with another system for keeping my study plan, because the last one didn't work. It's the maintenance part. And if you have ever tried to turn a disorganized kid into an organized kid, you know this is a long-term, labor-intensive process. Because it's not just a question of creating a system and handing it off to the kid and expecting him to run with it. Or even better, because everybody's organizational system is somewhat idiosyncratic, to say to the kid, you know what, your backpack's a mess. You can't find your homework when you need to do it. You can't find it when you need to hand it in. So let's take your backpack apart, and let's put our heads together and figure out a system for keeping it organized that will work for you. You still can't hand it off to the kid and expect him to run with it. And I finally figured out why that is. It's because at any single point in time, it is faster not to use an organizational system than to use an organizational system. It's way faster to take that science worksheet and just stuff it in your backpack wherever than it is to take out the science notebook, open that up, take out the incomplete homework folder, open that up, put it all neatly in, and put it all neatly back in. Yeah, it may take longer in the long run, but in the moment it's faster not to use an organizational system. And just one other thing I would say about, because from years of doing these workshops, talking to lots and lots of parents, parents and kids often have different executive skills profiles. I mean, there is a genetic component to it, but you will find that parents' strengths may not be the same as their kids' strengths. Or in some cases, parents' strengths are their kids' weakness. And that can cause tension. But one of the worst combinations I've seen in terms of the frustration it causes is a highly organized parent with a slob of a kid. That is just a bad combination. Because that highly organized parent really has trouble letting go. Really has trouble if everything in the bedroom is spotless. Has a really hard time just closing the bedroom door. So if that's you, then usually what I suggest is start small, pick your battles, don't give up on the bedroom altogether, you just assume it's never going to look the way you'd like it, and does he have a clean space to do his homework, for instance. Okay, time management. All right, here's where we start seeing the earlier developing executive skills factor in here, because time management is basically task initiation, sustained attention, and planning, with one additional element that's unique to time management, and that's time estimation. The ability to estimate how long it takes to do something. And in my experience, people with poor time management, that's the piece that doesn't work well for them. They really have trouble estimating accurately. And with kids, what I find is, more often than not, they underestimate how long an effortful task is going to take, and then they leave it to the last minute and they run out of time, or they pull an all-nighter. I do sometimes see kids who do the opposite. They overestimate how long a task is going to take, and then they don't want to start it because they think it's going to take forever. You know, in their mind, that's what it looks like. In either case, the solution is teach time estimation. Have kids practice estimating how long it takes to do something, and you can, anything is fodder for that, right? How long does it take you to get dressed? How long does it take you to get up out of the house for school in the morning? How long does it take you to finish that math homework? How long does it take you to clean up your bedroom or to put your dirty clothes in the laundry? I mean, anything. It can become a game as you ask kids to estimate and see how close they are to being right. And they will improve with that. They'll calibrate better as time goes on. Okay, goal-directed persistence. So this is a very late developing skill, particularly the way we think about it and the way we've defined it. And you can find a precursor of this, and you know, a 4-year-old is putting a really challenging puzzle together and is not going to stop until they get it right. That would be persistence, and it may well become goal-directed persistence. When we're talking about goal-directed persistence, we're not talking about goals you're going to finish by lunchtime. We're talking about longer-term goals, you know, goals for a marking period or an academic year, or for what you're going to do after you finish high school. And with that in mind, you can see where all the other executive skills play a role. Because you can't just let it go and forget about it, you got to remember it. So there's working memory. You have to have a plan for achieving the goal, so there's planning. You have to start and finish the plan, so there's task initiation and sustained attention. You have to resist the temptation to do all those other fun things you'd rather be doing than working on your goal, so there's response inhibition. And if that's irritating or annoying to you, then you also have to manage your emotions. So there's probably a place for every executive skill we've already talked about in goal-directed persistence. This is the killer skill for middle school parents, in my experience, because they expect kids to have goal-directed persistence by middle school. And in my experience, most don't. And I know that's what's going on when they come to my office and they say, doesn't my kid realize how he's doing in 8th grade is going to affect what college he gets into in 4 years? And of course, the short answer to that is no. Kids they don't live long enough. They can't see 4 years out. And they don't know what college is, so they can't even picture that. So they have much shorter time horizons. And we have to keep that in mind. So we can encourage goal-directed persistence. But the mistake I made as a parent is the one that many parents make. When I was focusing on goal-directed persistence with my kids around that age, I was focusing on academic performance. And I was pushing them to make the honor roll or to bring their grades up in one subject or another. They weren't there yet in middle school. So the place to start is with something the kid cares about. Setting goals around that. If they play sports, they may be willing to set a sports goal. Many things that high school students want that require, a couple of things that high school students want that require goal-directed persistence are a driver's license and a job. Both of those require some effort, require performing multiple steps before you achieve what you want, and require time. So all of that. A simpler way, and one that works even with quite young kids, is having them save up money for something they want. so it's more costly than something you can buy today or tomorrow. But, so then you can talk to kids about how you're going to earn the money, how you're going to save the money, how you're going to resist the temptation to spend small amounts of that money on cheaper things and never get to your goal of buying this bigger thing that you're trying to save money for. So all of that, of course, goes with systems. And then finally, metacognition. So I gave you one definition before. If I were going to use a psychological term, I talk about self-awareness. It's that understanding about yourself, that ability to see yourself in the big picture. And to be able to read the crowd. That requires metacognition as well. And it's interesting because this kicks in somewhere around early middle school, and it coincides with and probably helps explain that extreme self-consciousness that middle school kids have. Because for the first time, first of all, they're aware that they have thoughts. And since they're pretty self-absorbed, they're thinking about themselves. And they assume that everybody else has thoughts and they must be thinking about them too. So that's why that embarrassment goes there. And they're now picking up on social cues that have always been there, but they didn't know how to read before. So they're picking up on body language, tone of voice, gesture, facial expressions, all of that. And so they don't like to stand out, or maybe they do like to stand out in order to get a reaction, but they're always looking to how is the crowd reacting. It's also the skill that goes along with abstract thinking. And so because it emerges slowly and at different rates in different kids, some of the homework that we give kids to do starting around 5th, 6th grade, they may not have the metacognitive skills to handle easily. And so as you're looking at your kids and what homework they have to do, keep that in mind. Do they really understand what the teacher is asking them to do? Can they think deeply about, maybe it's a reading comprehension activity. Can they read between the lines? Can they understand motive of characters? All of that is metacognition as well. Okay, so for the longest time I thought about these skills as being absolutely critical to school success. And then I realized it's not just school success, it's life success. And so this cartoon really captures it for me. The title of the cartoon is Dale's Fourth Grade Education Pays Off. And the prospective employer is saying to Dale, the job you're applying for will require you no longer to just take apples and cursive writing. Which pretty much nails my fourth grade curriculum. But here's what I like is for this to be realistic, what would that employer be saying? The job you're applying for requiring a planning, time management, organization, goal-directed persistence, all executive skills. And so when we as either parents or teachers get too hung up on kids learning the academic curriculum and thinking that's the be-all and end-all, it's not. We want them to have the skills that they need in order to work and live productively. And those have more to do with executive skills than with algebraic equations. Okay, so I mentioned that these skills take 25 years to reach maturation. Now I want to give you the evidence to that. I'm going to show you a series of MRI scans really fast. So this is what the brain looks like when you put it under a magnetic resonance imaging machine, MRI. This guy named Paul Thompson at UCLA brought the same kids in year after year, starting at age 4, ending at age 21, and he took a snapshot of their brain. The key to understanding these images is the color. Okay, so an immature brain is red and orange. A mature brain is blue and purple. So you can see at age 4, there's nothing that's purple. What's blue is mostly sensory processes, like vision and touch, because those are the brain systems that come online the fastest. In the right-hand image, the top, this is the frontal lobe. Okay, that's where executive skills are. And at age 4, you can see there's vast swatches of it that are just red and yellow. There's a tiny bit of blue here, and then the rest is green. Oh, I should have said red and orange. So I'm going to take you to pretty quickly to age 21. Unfortunately, he stopped taking pictures at age 21. And I want you to see how late in the process the frontal lobe turns blue. It doesn't turn purple because we still have 4 or 5 years to go before full maturation. The other thing we know about brain development is the brain matures from back to front. So the frontal lobes is the last part of the brain to reach full maturation. You will see that here. You will see, this is the back of the brain, you will see the blue start here and travel up. Okay, let me show it to you. If I can find my cursor. Where's my cursor? There we go. Okay, so there we are at age 21. I realize the lighting in here isn't great. There's purple here. There's no purple here. And in fact, there's still a fair amount of green, and this says the 21-year-old brain is mostly mature, but even at the threshold of legal adulthood, there is still room for increases in emotional maturity and decision-making skills, which will come in the next few years. So we've got a ways to go, especially as kids are just beginning high school. They are nowhere near full capacity in terms of their executive skills. And in fact, I think, let me show you. Whoops. Sorry, I'll go on to the next one. Yeah. So this is the 4-year-old brain, this is the 13-year-old brain. So that's middle school. When I look at the 13-year-old brain, I'm not seeing a whole lot more blue than I saw at age 4. Think of what we ask middle school kids or early high school kids keep track of, play, and remember. You know, as soon as kids start changing classes, and every teacher has a different set of expectations about how homework is to be done, how notebooks are to be kept, how tests are to be taken, how projects are to be completed. Many schools have A days and B days, and the kids have to keep track of because they're using block scheduling. Many schools have rotating schedules, so first period on Monday, second period on Tuesday. I've worked in several schools in recent years that had 7-day rotating schedules. So first period on Monday changes from week to week. These kids have complicated after-school schedules, and many of them are living in 2 homes. And let's not even talk about hybrid learning, because hybrid learning just increased the complexity that much more. So we are asking kids to juggle a lot of information and keep track of it, which suggests they need some more support helping them do that, and they also need to be cut some slack. Because they got a long ways to go before they hit 21. And even then, it's not done. Okay, I'm keeping track of the time here. So I want to move, so now we've got the 11 skills down. I want to talk a bit about the language we use to describe these kids. This was a kid I saw twice. He was 7 the first time I saw him. He was one of the most hyperactive, impulsive kids I'd seen at that point. He also had Tourette's syndrome. He couldn't take stimulant medications because they exacerbated his tics. He managed to get through elementary and middle school successfully. He had a couple of things going for him. First of all, he was smart. He did not have any learning disabilities, although his attention problems were pretty significant. Second of all, he had a mom who stayed on top of things. A mom who made sure he did his homework, who made sure it was in his backpack, who kept in close contact with his teacher so she knew what he had to keep, what he had to do and when it was due. And then he hit high school, and he basically crashed and burned. And she called me after his freshman year in high school and said to me, I can't do it by myself anymore, I'm going to lose him. I'm going to need help from the school. Because if you think about a kid like this, what happens when they hit high school becomes a moving target. If the kid comes home and says, oh, the teacher changed the test, it's not tomorrow, it's not till next Tuesday, how does the mom know? Or if the kid says, yeah, I handed in my English paper, how does the mom know? And if the kid either forgets or chooses to tell his mother that he has no homework, and whatever the web portal is not completely up to date and accurate, and very few are, the mom has no way of knowing what's due when. So she asked me to evaluate him to get some additional support from the school, which we were able to do. He had failed 2 classes. He was in summer school making those classes up. He had D's in 2 other classes. He had an A in 1 class. It was a class called ROTC. This is Spalding High School in Rochester. It's the only school I know in the state that offers a high school ROTC program. It was perfect for this kid. He wanted to go into the military. And if you think about what that class must be like, it's probably both structured and regimented and active and outdoors. Perfect for him. So he aced it. So as part of my evaluation, I asked the mom to find one teacher who knew the kid well to fill out a rating scale on him. And this is what that teacher said. Actually, I had her fill out several, but this is one piece of one rating scale. What concerns you most about this pupil? That he's lazy and not working to his potential. Please describe the best things about this pupil. He's sweet and has a good sense of humor. which describes just about every kid with ADD that I've ever worked with, including my own son. But I just want to call your attention to the language we're using to describe kids. Lazy, not working to potential. Those sound like character flaws to me. Those sound like dead-end roads, something you feel like you have no control over. And what's the intervention for lazy? I mean, we have interventions for task initiation, sustained attention, etc. I'm not sure we have an intervention for lazy. And then kids start thinking of themselves as lazy, and then that becomes part of who they are. And then you have to try to undo that. So here's my, if you take nothing else away from this presentation, and I'm probably preaching to the choir, but I'll throw it out anyway. Instead of calling students this, lazy, unmotivated, not working to potential, disruptive, oppositional, messy, tardy, forgetful, absent-minded, or lacking a work ethic, how about we describe them as having challenges in task initiation, sustained attention, response inhibition, emotional control, etc. All those negative terms on the left-hand side, and I've heard them all from parents or teachers or both, has a corresponding executive skill on the right-hand side. These just make me feel discouraged. These lead us to problem solving. So even if you don't use these terms, you may hear a teacher or a parent or another relative using those terms. And all I ask you to do is just gently say, you know, I prefer not to think of it as lazy. I like to think of it as having problems with task initiation and sustained attention. And we're trying to do something about that. Just give them a different language. Okay, so quickly, because I do want to leave time for questions. This is all my books condensed into 5 minutes. Three primary ways to help kids with weak executive skills. One is change the environment. Create an environment that's more supportive or less punishing. You're not trying to change the kid at all. Sometimes just cues and reminders will do that. I'll give examples of all of these. Teach the youngster the weak skill. So just walk them through the steps of whatever that skill is in the context of a particular behavior or routine that is part of their everyday life. Or use incentives to get the youngsters to use skills that are hard for them. You know, in the early stages of acquiring any habit, and as I said, these are habits, it's really hard, it's painful. In fact, in terms of what's going on in the brain is working twice as hard in the early stages of acquiring a habit. The brain is burning way more glucose, which is the fuel that powers the brain. So sometimes you can entice kids to do the hard work that involves practice by throwing an incentive on top of that. What I say to parents and teachers all the time is progress is measured in years and not months with these kids. It does take a long time, and kids need lots and lots of practice. So if we're going to modify the environment, we can change the physical or social environment, we can modify the tasks we expect kids to perform, or we can change the way adults interact with kids. Again, to make them feel more supported. So here are just a few examples of environmental modifications. Managing distractions. Oh, this little asterisk. I should need to put a little asterisk by that one. Because over the years, I've had so many parents say to me, could you tell my kid to stop listening to the music on his phone while he's doing his homework? Because I know that's distracting him. Actually, it may not be. There's a fair amount of research that suggests that background music can actually help kids focus. Now, you may want to talk to your kid about what music they're listening to. My son with ADD said he could never listen to music with lyrics because he paid attention to the words. But instrumental music, that worked. Because what that background music does is it screens out larger and more unpredictable distractions. It screens out the television in the next room, or two younger siblings having a pillow fight, or whatever. It just makes it easier to focus. Modify tasks, shortening them, build in breaks, creating a schedule, build in choice. I often have parents say to me, so I tell my kid, math's is the hardest subject, so I always say, get math out of the way first when you do your homework, which logically makes sense, but it removes all choice. And so my preference is to say to a kid, hey, you have 3 things you have to do. What do you want to do first? Because choice actually builds energy. And I mean, eventually, if it turns out they're always too exhausted to do their math because they've always chosen to do everything else first, then you may want to renegotiate. But in the beginning, whenever you can give kids choice, that's a better way to go. Give advance warnings when something changes. If a kid has his heart set on doing something this weekend and it turns out there's a family event that is going to take everybody away from the house, give them some warning, let them know that. Maybe make a deal with them. I'll give other suggestions, particularly geared towards teenagers in a minute. And then use visual cues rather than verbal nags. I talked about that earlier, but here's my favorite example of that. It may have been the same workshop in Portland, Maine. This mom described this whiteboard calendar she created for her son because he kept forgetting what he had to do when. So I said, can you send me a picture? I really want to see what this looks like. So she sent me this picture. And you can buy those huge calendars. And so every month she set it up for him. This was a kid who had block scheduling and kept forgetting what he had to do for each day. So she set up the day so he knows it. She's got it color-coded, so email is in red, materials are on Google Classroom is in blue, green is backpack papers. She's working off of 3 different calendars here, and she's got like 9 dry erase markers. So what executive skill do you think she's really good at? Right? Yeah, she's got planning down really well. So she put this in a prominent place, and where her son could see it as he went out the door in the morning. And if you're worried that after a while this kind of thing fades into the woodwork, the mom could say to the kid, could you read today's schedule to me just so I know? So, she could even say, tell me what you have today, because I've lost track. But just getting the kid to read it aloud as well as see it, so it imprints the day's schedule better. Use effective praise. It's a whole lot easier to use ineffective praise. It's a whole lot easier to say, great job, smart kid. Nice job. Effective praise is specific. It lets the kid know exactly what they're being praised for. So this first one, I appreciate you loading the dishwasher without my having to bug you about it. You're praising 2 things. You're praising the kid for loading the dishwasher and for not having to be bugged about it. Your brother was pushing your buttons, but you worked hard to keep your temper in check. Maybe the kid loses his temper and decks his brother, but you saw him trying hard not to. Maybe the next time he'll try a little harder, and the time after that, maybe he'll actually control his temper. So we call that praising successive approximations. This last one is the hardest. Try for a ratio of 3 positives for every piece of corrective feedback. The research is very clear on this. If you can achieve that ratio, you can change behavior. This is really hard to do. In fact, I just ran across a study looking at middle school teachers, and they found even 1-to-1 makes a huge difference. 1 positive for 1 corrective. So start there, and just remind yourself. If you just issued a criticism or a complaint or a correction to your kid, think to yourself, okay, I've got to notice, I've got to praise him for something he's done right, so that he hears the positive as well. Check the timer. Okay, so that's how we modify the environment. Oh, and by the way, in terms of praise, because a lot of kids get really, especially teenagers, get really self-conscious about praise. If you feel like all that does is set up a fight or a kid's chance to yell back at you or whatever, write a note, put it on their pillow. That gives you time to compose what you want to say and think about how specific is this, and it will mean a lot to the kid. He may never tell you, or maybe he'll tell you when he's 25. But I know it will have an impact. Okay, our general approach to teaching the skills is come up with a step-by-step process, embed it in a daily routine, and have a visual. So that's what this is, a room cleaning checklist. This was actually created as a private school in Vermont, the Greenwood School, a school for kids with dyslexia. The school decided they really had to tackle the bedrooms. This is work at home as well. What they decided was that when kids moved into the school at the beginning of the year, this was about 3 years ago, they had them put all their stuff away where it belonged, and then they took pictures. And then they turned it into a checklist that they posted on the kids' wall. So it's personalized for each kid. So this was Jack. Now, there are 10 things on this list. For someone who's organizationally challenged like me, that's really daunting. But they've broken it down into 4 pieces. My clean desk, my clean shelves, my clean bed, my clean floor. Nothing has more than 4 steps. I think I can tolerate that. Another example, same thing. And create a routine, spell it out, and provide a visual. This is a planning form for making a homework plan. So this is not where they actually keep the assignment, the actual instructions for the assignment. This is where they list math, English, chemistry. So for each task, you then ask them to estimate how long they think it's going to take. Oops, sorry. This is my, that's my reminder to charge my watch. If I didn't set an alarm, I would not remember. So now I'll probably forget when I go home. So how long will it take? That's time estimation, time management, right? The next column, when will you start? What's that? That's the plan with the start time. This column, where will you work, that's not necessarily connected to an executive skill, but I added that column after reading all the research on mental rehearsal and visual imagery. Because what that research does is if you mentally rehearse carrying out a task, especially if you use vivid visual imagery, that increases the likelihood that you'll carry out the task. So you don't have to walk a kid through an entire elaborate mental rehearsal, but at least if he has to do algebra and he's identified when he's going to start at 5 o'clock, where's he going to work? He's going to do it at the kitchen table. Well, then you have him situated at a certain place at a certain time. Ask him to just visualize that. And then the next row, if you actually write down the actual start and stop times, that's to check on two things. Were they right about their estimates? So now we're practicing time estimation. And did they start when they said they were going to start? And then you check off when they're done. Okay. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on incentives. I know parents have strong feelings on incentives. I've heard from too many parents, I'm not going to pay my kid for something they should want to do anyway, or they have to do anyway. But I'm pretty pragmatic, and was as a parent as well. Incentives does make it easier to do something. And so that helps. And putting an incentive after a task teaches delayed gratification. That means the kid has to wait for the reward. So now you're teaching response inhibition and delayed gratification. And I've created very elaborate incentive systems. I've found both clinically and with my own kids it works once. And then the kid gets burned out and I get burned out. So whenever possible, I rely on simpler incentives. And the top one is my favorite. Giving the kids something to look forward to doing as soon as the ethical task is done. As soon as you finish that math homework, you get to play half an hour video games. And that's the way to phrase it, by the way. Don't phrase it, you can't play video games until you finish your homework, because that just sets up a power struggle. As soon as you finish your homework, you get to play video games. Alternate between preferred and non-preferred activities, build in frequent short breaks, and you pace this with the kid, gradually increase the amount of work, gradually shorten the breaks, and then use specific praise. All right, so just a few, let me see, yeah, I've got a little more time. I want to give you a few tips for working with teenagers. This is a quote, I say it's attributed to Mark Twain. I double-checked this today, because I had a guy come up to me at one of my workshops and said, Mark Twain's dad died when he was 12. This can't be Mark Twain. I Googled the quote. It always is attributed to Mark Twain. At any rate, I love the quote. As a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant I could hardly stand to have the old man around. But when I got to be 21, I was astonished at how much he had learned in 7 years. Any of you who have kids in their 20s know the reality of that. That the kids' perceptions of their parents change over time. So these are just my words of advice for working with teenagers. Each probably could write a chapter about each one. Pick your battles. You don't have to fight about everything. Decide what's worth fighting about and what isn't. Use natural or logical consequences. I talked to them. I did a workshop in Vail, Colorado this weekend, and a mom told me that her son had gotten a job at the beginning of the summer, and he was all set to save up for something he really wanted. She helped him set up an account, and he had a debit card he was using. And by the end of the summer, not only had he not saved up for what he wanted, but he actually had overdrawn his account. And then he came to her and he said, Mom, it's homecoming. I need a suit, and I need to buy my homecoming tickets. And the mom said, well, that's the kind of thing that kids usually save up money for. I said, well, I don't have any money. So, sorry. That is a natural consequence of not saving money. And that's a gutsy mom. I mean, many of us, don't we just sort of give in and think, oh, everybody needs the homecoming dance experience? I mean, could we really deny our kid that? She did a nice job of that. Make access to privileges contingent on performance. So as soon as you show me that you're ready for the next step in terms of the road to independence, then that's what you get. Be willing to negotiate, make deals. Involve others when you can, tutors, teachers, guidance counselors, or coaches. Work on positive communication skills. I'm going to make this PowerPoint available to people. This is too small to read. It's just, on the left-hand side are negative ways of communicating, and on the right-hand side are positive ways. But if you get the PowerPoint, you will be able to read that through. Here's a suggestion I came up with a couple of years ago. I have two sons. My younger son started working for a company called GitLab. He's in computers. He lives in Japan. GitLab was based in San Francisco, but they don't even have an office anymore. Everybody works remotely, which works really well for my son. But GitLab is totally open source, and one of the things they do is they put their employee handbook on their website. I mean, it's thousands of pages long, but you can browse through it. So Isaac sent me the link, and I started looking through it, and there's a page for the CEO. And you go to that page, and the CEO has various headings. One of them is the CEO's flaws. And he listed about 8 things that he doesn't think he does very well, and said, so if I do this, you have my permission to do this. So I'll give you a few examples of what he said. When in a rush, I would jump to conclusions. It's okay to ask, can we take more time to discuss this? I come across as negative since I focus on what can be improved. It's okay to ask, what recent improvements are you happy with? I look serious all the time. It is okay to say, maybe you can smile more. Sid Brandy, he's Dutch. That's his name, I can't pronounce it. But anyway, that was his page on his employee handbook. So I thought, wow, if I'd had this when my kids were in high school, we might have had different communication patterns. So here's what it would look like if I had known this then. I might have said to my kids, I tend to react emotionally and critically when I first hear something that upsets me. It's okay to say, Mom, I'm going to give you time to think this through. My kids would have loved that. This next one really applies. My older son was not, neither of my sons were students, but my older son was sort of deliberately not the world's best student. And because he was my older son, I put all my hopes and dreams into him. So if I had said to him, I expect you to care as much about getting straight A's as I did when I was in high school. It's okay to say, Mom, we are 2 different people. Can I tell you what I care about? Which every kid should be able to communicate that to their parents. And I think if my son had been able to put it into words, what he would have told me was, my friendships are really, really important to me. And I am not willing to close myself off in my bedroom and do all the work it takes to get straight A's if that means I can't strengthen my friendships. He found a balance. He didn't flunk out of school. He got into college, but he and I probably would have had better communication if I had not always been leaning on him, because I wanted him to be the honor student that I was. Okay, so that's just a thought. Seek help if you need it. Therapists often act as third-party mediators that help parents and teenagers communicate better. Set goals that are realistic. Sometimes the best thing you can do is to keep your kid in the game until their frontal lobe's mature enough for them to take over. I mean, there were times, again, my older son, the one with ADD, I felt like I was holding his head above water to keep him from drowning until he learned how to swim. So my job was to keep him from drowning. It was not to, I knew I couldn't teach him. He wasn't ready to learn how to swim at that point, using that metaphor. Okay. Keep your eye on the prize. So I do think, although I've sort of downplayed goal directed persistence and say we push it too quickly with kids, I do think that's the ultimate goal. If we can build goal directed persistence into kids, that will probably set them up for strengthening all their other executive skills. But if they're not there yet, model it yourself. That's how I managed to get through both my sons in middle school. When they were not there at the point of caring about academic performance, I kept saying to myself, they have 2 parents with tremendous amounts of goal-directed persistence. When they're ready for it, when they find their passion, they will channel their parents. And that's exactly what happened. It happened at different ages. My younger son, it happened in high school. My older son was age 25. When he found a job that mattered to him, he put himself 150% into it and has ever since. Help them set and achieve little goals. They add up over time. Praise effort. I am impressed with how hard you work for that. Emphasize your child's goals, not yours. And then, finally, be patient. Your child at 15 will not look the same way at 25. Okay, this is my younger son. He gave me permission to use these 2 photographs. That was Isaac at 15. It was a rough time. Way more for me than for him. He was happy. He thought he looked cool. At one point he wanted dreadlocks. He had very thin blonde hair. I mean, how do you do dreadlocks when you have thin blonde hair? But that's what he wanted. So that was his way of asserting himself. So what did he look like at 25? He looked like this. Actually, he looked like that at 19. He didn't go to college. He got a job in computers right out of high school, and he cleaned up fast. But if you had told me when he was that age that he would look like that within 3 or 4 years, I would have said, I don't think so. It's all, my mother used to say, it's just a phase. It's really true, it's just a phase. Okay, one final comment and then I'll be happy to open it up for questions. This is a quote from, I've done a lot of work in Connecticut. I was working at an alternative high school in Fairfield, Connecticut. And the principal there at the time, a woman named Gail Danowitz, told me that she had started using restorative practice, restorative justice techniques in her school, and it really made a difference. They were using it for school discipline and for conflict resolution. And I didn't know what that term meant much at that point, so I said, give me a website, I need to know more about this. So I went to a website that she sent me to, and I found this wonderful quote from the head of the International Institute for Restorative Practices, because this really does capture my philosophy about working with kids. Human beings are happier, more cooperative and productive, and more likely to make positive changes in their behavior when those in positions of authority do things with them rather than to them or for them. I think very often parents do things for kids because it's faster sometimes when they're younger and because it's easier when they're older. Sometimes they want to do things to kids because they're just so annoyed with them. But if you can make it a more collaborative relationship and give them some say in the decision-making process, it can pay off.